Let's talk about Donald Trump and his favorite word, tariffs.
The most beautiful word in the entire dictionary.
It's more beautiful than love.
I have stopped wars with tariffs.
Trump announced that he would slap major new tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and China.
These are America's three biggest trading partners he's going after. With a 25% tariff on all goods from Canada and Mexico, and an extra 10% tariff on stuff from China. He says it's to push back against crime and drugs and illegal aliens coming from those countries into the US. But Trump also says tariffs are going to be good for the US economy.
This country can become rich with the proper use of tariffs.
This plan will bring jobs and growth into our country at levels never seen before.
Others think it'll do the reverse.
It's rare to find a topic on which economists agree as strongly as they do that this would be bad for growth and cause inflation to spike.
So what exactly are tariffs? Why is Trump so keen on them? And why do some people think Trump's plans could backfire? Before we get into all of that, here's why you and I should care about tariffs. They're part of how global trade works, and so much of the stuff we consume and the price we pay for it depends on this complicated, intertwined system that involves buying and selling between different countries. And a change in one part of the system can create big ripple effects, especially when the change comes from a major economy like the US. Tariffs are essentially a tax on stuff that's imported. So let's say there's a US company that sells jeans, and it buys them from a company in China for $10 each. Now, if the US government introduces a 10% tariff on clothing from China, it means that for every pair of jeans the US company imports, it has to pay a $1 tax to the US government.
Many Americans think that foreign governments pay the tariffs instead of people here in the United States.
Tariffs have been used by countries as long as there have been countries that have had governments capable of taxing anything, because goods crossing the border are the easiest thing to tax because you can see them.
So tariffs have actually been around for a long time, hundreds of years. But over the last few decades, a lot of countries have kept them pretty low by historical standards. There's been this widely accepted idea, driven mostly by Western countries, that importing stuff with low tariffs or none at all helps make all countries better off. That's the idea behind free trade.
We remain opposed as ever to protectionism because America's growth and future depend on trade.
We must go to more open and free trade, because protectionism isn't really good for anyone.
We must continue the fight to lower foreign trade barriers, which slow economic growth here in the United States and around the world.
As free trade expands across the earth, the realm of human freedom expands with it.
The understanding of economists like myself is that the world benefits by not taxing trade, that we get more efficient things, we get cheaper things. It's just, it helps the world economy tremendously.
So if a lot of economists think free trade is more efficient, why would governments use tariffs? Well, here are three main reasons: to bring in money, to protect domestic industries, and in turn protect and create jobs, or as a political tool, to appeal to voters at home, or to put pressure on other countries, sometimes on issues that have nothing to do with trade. And we've seen Donald Trump refer to all these reasons to justify his tariff plans. He said money from new tariffs could help offset cuts to other taxes, like income tax. It's a model he says worked well in the past, although he's going back more than 100 years.
Our country's vast manufacturing wealth was created at a time with very little domestic taxation. Few regulations, and most revenue came from tariffs from other countries.
Did you just float out the idea of getting rid of income taxes and replacing it with tariffs?
Well, okay.
Were you serious about that?
Yeah, sure, but why not?
But remember, the money that flows to the government when tariffs are in place isn't free money. Someone has to pay for it. In our jeans example earlier, we said it's the importer that pays the tariff to the government. That's true technically, but who ultimately pays is a more complicated question. Here are a couple of scenarios. If the jeans company has to pay an extra $1 on every pair of jeans, they might just raise the price for the customer. So a $20 pair of jeans is now $21, pushing the cost of the tariff onto consumers. But more expensive jeans means the US company will probably sell fewer pairs, and therefore it'll buy fewer from the Chinese supplier. In another scenario, the US company could take the hit themselves. But there are other knock-on effects there too.
If they're not going to pass those costs on to consumers, they can invest less in their domestic operations. They can hire fewer Americans. They can pay out less to their shareholders. And so just like a corporate tax, at the end of the day, these companies aren't just simply taking the tariff cost. Someone in the United States, workers, investors, or consumers will end up paying.
And that's important to keep in mind when we look at the next reason why Trump's into tariffs. The idea that they can protect and boost domestic industries and create jobs. During the election campaign, Trump said he would introduce a 60% tariff on all goods from China and a blanket 10 to 20% on all other imports to the US. The theory is, if tariffs make it more expensive to import stuff, then there's more incentive for companies to make those products at home, which means investing in factories and workers.
And make the United States into a manufacturing powerhouse like it used to be many years ago.
But is it that straightforward? Well, that's debatable.
I think it is way too simplistic to say, put in place a tariff, get jobs. Isn't that wonderful? I don't think it works that smoothly. Building manufacturing is a long-term process and a big investment. And no one knows if the tariffs are political, if they're going to last.
And even if a tariff does help to create jobs in certain industries, they can lead to big extra costs for other parts of the economy. Take this example. In 2009, the Obama administration imposed a 35% tariff on imported Chinese tires to help out American tire manufacturers. One study calculated that it saved about 1,200 jobs in the US tire industry, but it ended up driving up the price of all tires, and American consumers paid an extra $1.1 billion for tires as a result. So that works out at roughly $900,000 for every job that was saved.
The benefits to the protected people are smaller than the costs to the buyers or a large part of the rest of the economy. Those who want the protection, the domestic producers, are very aware of the benefits to them, and the people they're hurting are not usually very much aware of it.
This means tariffs can go down well with voters, who often see the benefits but not the trade-offs, which brings us to the last point in our list, and the politics of all this. For Trump, tariffs are a big part of his America First message, which resonates with many Americans who feel that things were better in the past.
Some might say it's economic nationalism. I call it common sense. I call it America First.
Protectionism seems to be politically popular. It certainly helped get Donald Trump elected in the US.
And here's some more background to Trump's pitch. In 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization, or WTO, which sets rules and regulations to make trade between countries easier. It led to a surge in cheap Chinese imports to the US. Think of all those toys and clothes in stores like Walmart, for example. But there were also accusations that the Chinese government wasn't playing by the WTO rules, doing things like providing subsidies so that Chinese companies could keep their prices extra low. It became really hard for US businesses to compete with Chinese ones and helped accelerate a decline in US manufacturing.
A lot of jobs were lost, and those jobs weren't easily replaced.
Communities across the United States, not huge numbers of them, but enough of them to be very noticeable, were dramatically hurt. And I think that helped to shift the public attitude away from wanting trade and towards fearing trade. And that was happening before Trump came along, and to some extent he picked up on that.
Then there's the way Trump is using tariffs for political leverage abroad. Remember those new tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China. He's not saying they're about trade. He's trying to use them as a bargaining chip for more action on drugs and illegal immigration. And Trump's announcement does put those countries under pressure because the economic impact for all of them could be huge. In Mexico's case, it exported $475 billion worth of goods to the US in 2023. A 25% tariff would make all those things more expensive and less attractive for buyers in the US, so that could hurt Mexican producers. But the tariff could hurt the US economy too.
2/3 of the tomatoes that Americans purchase are from Mexico. 90% of the avocados that they purchase are from Mexico, just to mention 2 examples. So that guac is definitely going to cost extra.
It goes much further than the cost of fruit and vegetables. US manufacturers depend heavily on components that come from places like Mexico and China. Trump's plan will push up the cost of those components, what economists call inputs.
Over the last few decades, we've outsourced either manufacturing the entire product overseas or outsourced many of the components they produce overseas.
Manufacturing today is very much global. About half of everything we import into the United States are manufacturing inputs. So when you apply tariffs to those inputs, you actually harm American manufacturers. When the Trump administration applied tariffs on steel and aluminum back in 2018, that harmed steel-consuming industries in the United States, like automakers.
Another reason Trump's new tariffs could backfire is that they could hurt US companies that operate in other countries. In some ways, that's on purpose, because for Trump, the whole point is to force those companies to make stuff at home instead.
My message is simple. Make your product here in America and only in America. We're not going to watch our wealth and jobs get ripped away from us and sent to foreign countries.
But that will hit American companies who've moved some of their production to places like Mexico because it's cheaper. We're talking about big names like Ford and General Motors.
So the way it worked is that some of the parts, components, they imported from China or from the US, and then do the assembly operations in Mexico, and then re-export it back into the United States by taking advantage of the trade agreements such that the Americans can get a very good price for the car in the end.
Probably the biggest threat for the US economy is the risk of retaliatory tariffs, i.e. countries targeted by Trump responding with tariffs of their own. In other words, a trade war. Mexico's president has already said she will retaliate.
A un arancel vendrá otro en respuesta, y así hasta que pongamos en riesgo empresas comunes.
And check out this chart. Mexico, Canada, and China, the 3 countries Trump is initially targeting, are the 3 biggest destinations for US exports. That's a lot of US trade that would suffer from a trade war. So you can see why some people are skeptical about whether Trump's tariff plan will boost the US economy in the way he says it will. A lot depends on how much Trump actually follows through on, how other countries ultimately respond, and also what time frame we use to measure the results. We were just in Mexico filming an explainer about how it's becoming much harder for migrants to get to the US border. You can watch it here.